You're listening to The Money Hour with your host, Tina Mitchell, and co-host Keelan Harvey on Alternative Talk AM 1150. Now, back to the show with local mortgage experts Tina Mitchell and Keelan Harvey.
Welcome back to The Money Hour on 1150 AM KKNW at the Saturday, April 27th show. I am your host, Tina Mitchell.
And I'm your co-host, Keelan Harvey.
Bringing in each week the best of the best in every area regarding your financing to help you in today's economy. If you're hearing our show at a different time or day, you are listening to a rebroadcast, but we're here to answer any questions and connect you with the guests that we have on the show. Please call 1-855-400-1150. Again, that's 1-855-400-1150 or online at themoneyhour.com. And in studio, first time in studio, we have Hamilton Gardiner of Holmquist Gardiner PLLC. Real estate contract breaches and earnest money disputes. And I know we've got our real estate experts in here, so this is going to be a great conversation for them to listen into as well. Hamilton, thank you so much for joining us in studio.
Thanks for having me.
And a little bit about Hamilton. He is the founding partner of Holmquist Gardiner PLLC. The firm is celebrating its 10th year in business during the last decade. Plus, Hamilton has acted as legal counsel for many commercial, residential, and multifamily property owners in the greater Seattle area. He handles all aspects of real estate transactions as well as litigation and evictions when disputes arise. His primary goal is to be a value-added partner and trusted advisor to his clients. Nothing gets Hamilton more excited than to see his clients succeed and to know he was able to have a positive impact on their business.
Hamilton, super excited to have you in studio. We have a mutual friend. I got to give a shout out to Darren and, of course, Carly, his wife.
Hi, Darren. Hi, Carly.
Hi, Darren. Hi, Carly.
Hi, Darren.
That's how I met you, and I've used you personally. You're a great wealth of knowledge, and it's a privilege to have you on the show. Let's talk about real estate contract breaches. What the heck is a real estate contract breach? Tell us about it.
Yeah, it's a big kind of question, and for purposes of this show, I'm really focusing on like the residential side.
Okay.
Because breaches can happen in a commercial context and a residential context, of course. And generally speaking, what that means is that somebody didn't follow the contract. Now, in the residential context, that can happen where somebody didn't put earnest money down, they failed to make agreed-upon fixes, they didn't clear items from title, they failed to satisfy any sort of contingencies, or, something that I saw a lot of, particularly the last couple of years, is people making allegations of misrepresentations as to the condition of the property.
Interesting.
And there could be issues with the contingencies in that process as well, with all the, crazy stuff that was going on. So what happens after a breach occurs, Hamilton?
So what happens after the breach, it actually depends on like when the breach occurred. Are you in contract? Have you closed the sale? Are you in a contingency period? And what was the breach? One thing that people try and do is how can we move forward with the contract? Mm-hmm. Or if you can't move forward with the contract, what are you going to do? So what happens after the breach occurs? Really, you should be talking to your broker, or depending on what the breach is, you should talk to a legal attorney.
Yeah, which a lot of times that's what the broker's going to do, is they're going to pick up their phone and call the attorney to find out how to proceed forward.
Call Hamilton, people. Call Hamilton.
Exactly.
Give me a call. I get those calls, and one of the things I tell a lot of my broker friends and colleagues is that, a 5-minute call with me is going to save a lot of time, money, and stress down the road. So call me anytime.
Yeah, and just speaking of it, while I'm thinking about it, we definitely need to get you in for our Power Hour Lunch and Learn in front of our real estate professionals. We educate them on a monthly basis, and, I think that would be awesome.
Would love to do it.
Yeah.
So speaking of, you mentioned moving forward with a contract. Can you, if there's a breach, can you still move forward typically, or?
Yeah, and this is something that is very common in the residential context, is that there's been a breach. Let's say you're still 3 weeks away from closing. Can you still move forward? You absolutely can, but you're going to have to agree with the other side.
I see.
Whether you're on the buying side or you're on the selling side, you're going to have to come up with an agreement on how you're going to move forward. Are you going to be able to cure that breach? Are you going to be able to fix the issue that's come up between the buyer and the seller? And ultimately, you're going to have to come up with a compromise to move forward. If you're the one that was the person that breached, you're probably going to have to do something for the non-breaching party. If the buyer breached, maybe the buyer's going to put down some more earnest money.
Yeah.
Yeah, how are you going to make this right?
Yeah, how are you
Yes.
going to make this? How are you going to make this right?
Yeah.
And the same thing with the seller. If the seller breached the contract, but the seller still wants to move forward, what are you going to do for the buyer?
Yes. Yeah. So what about for either parties if they do not want to move forward with the contract?
So that's a tricky question, and it's a tricky position that people can get put themselves into.
Yeah.
If they don't want to move forward, and sometimes there'll be a dispute between the seller and the buyer where they just don't like each other for whatever reason. They've decided that they don't want to move forward with this contract. Now, if you're on the selling side and you said, you know what, I don't want to move forward, and the price has actually increased over the last month that I've been under contract, and maybe I can get a better price. If they weren't the breaching party and they said, hey, I want to be out of this thing, you really run the risk of, is the buyer going to proceed with a specific performance lawsuit and say, no, I'm not going to let you out of this contract. You breached it. I want to force you to sell this property to me.
Yes.
Or if you're on the if the buyer just walks away and you can't, if you can't find them, then is it the question? Are they going to give up the earnest money?
Yeah, speaking of, who gets the earnest money at the end of the day? How does that work out?
So that is an interesting and a very common question that comes up is who's going to get the earnest money? Well, it depends on who breached the contract, and if the buyer breached the contract and the seller is unwilling to proceed with the transaction, then the seller could keep the earnest money.
Yeah. So how does that work? And we're coming out of just a crazy market with the lack of inventory, which now we're getting more into a balanced market. But like when a buyer waives their finance contingency and basically says this $50,000 earnest money goes to you if anything goes wrong. Well, if the seller has breached the contract, then their earnest money would still be protected in that scenario. Would that be correct?
Yeah, and one thing that it would be still protected in that situation. And what I've seen there is that a lot of potential clients will call me up and say, oh, yeah, well, the seller breached the contract. And this is a very simple issue, and it's really clear that they breached the contract. But I actually find that that's uncommon. No.
Yes.
There's a question on the timing of, did they submit this form by this date, or did they waive the contingency by this date? And it's not always that clear.
Yeah.
So if the seller breached, then that could be the case that the buyer is going to get the earnest money back if they don't want to proceed with the contract.
Hence another reason you got to talk to Hamilton, because only lawyers think about all those details. I mean, I might have a lawyer with a speeding ticket, and he shocked me. I thought it was real simple, but all the things that you can do when you have great representation to help your situation. Right?
And it's needed. It's absolutely needed, especially if there's $50,000 out there.
Yeah.
I mean, you want to make sure that you're making the right decisions to either receive the earnest money back, or if you're the seller, to make sure that you're able to collect it in the event the buyer does breach that contract.
Yes.
Yeah, speeding ticket's not a good comparison. We're talking about
Did
a
you call
lot of
my
money
guy?
in real estate here.
You call my guy on that speeding ticket?
I did.
Yeah, thanks,
I did.
Dennis.
He's going to hook it up, hopefully. We'll see.
He will.
Oops. Anyways, so what happens with an escrow company? Let's say nobody can decide, the selling and the buying parties aren't agreeing, and the escrow company's in the middle. What typically happens in those scenarios?
So one thing to keep in mind is the escrow company doesn't have a dog in the fight. They're the neutral party. They're the one that is supposed to close the transaction. They're supposed to compile all the documents, get signatures, hold on to the earnest money, and then transfer funds at closing. So if there's been a breach and the buyer and the seller can't agree, then the escrow company is going to interplead those funds into the court registry. So they're going to wait a while. Maybe it'll be a week, maybe it'll be a couple weeks, it might even be a month. I've seen that it go that long. And then they're just going to give the money to the court registry, and then they're going to let the buyer and seller hash it out.
So what about how long you said that was months or so that could take?
Well, yeah, after the breach has been alleged by either side, the escrow company may take, a week, a couple weeks to put the money into the court registry. And then from there, it's going to be up to the parties to decide how long this is going to take to resolve itself.
Yeah, and I just, while we're on escrow here, really want to, say, escrows, you've got to remember that they are not attorneys. So they're not giving any legal advice on anything. They're just trying to make sure, but mistakes can happen in reading that contract and understanding they're representing a contract as that third party. So not to get confused what escrow is.
Escrow doesn't represent either side.
Yes.
Either. They're not going to give legal advice. They don't represent either side. And if there is a dispute, they're just going to deposit into the court. And they are able to, under their contract that both the buyer and seller have signed off on.
Yeah.
So what happens specifically after escrow deposits the escrow funds with the court? What's the next step?
Well, at that point in time, the buyer and seller have got themselves a lawsuit on their hands, and at that point, you really want to hire an attorney. I've seen it where one side hires an attorney, and I've been on that one side where they hired me, and the other side didn't hire an attorney, and that usually does not go well. And you're not going to be able to get the funds out there out of the court registry without hiring an attorney. I mean, not to say that it's impossible, but it's very, very, very unlikely.
That makes sense.
So, Hamilton, as we wrap up our time here with you, just general advice if someone is listening to the show today and gets into an earnest money dispute.
So if you are in an earnest money dispute, my number one piece of advice is to come up with an agreement with the other side, make a compromise, and 9 times out of 10, it's going to be split the earnest money. Somebody wants to be 100% right. Nobody ever is.
Yes.
So, come up with an agreement on who's going to take what, whether it's going to be 50-50, 75-25, split the earnest money, take it, and walk away.
Instead of going through all of the additional cost and stress and emotional pain attached to not coming to an agreement, yes?
That's right. Even just if you're going to get into any earnest money dispute, I mean, at a minimum, it's probably going to cost you $2,500 in attorney's fees, but it could be well over $50,000, depending on how much you want to fight. And some people really want to fight. So come up with an agreement and split the earnest money and just move on.
Yeah. Well, Hamilton, thank you so much. And for those of you that don't want to fight, Hamilton is here to represent and help you through that process. So, Hamilton, thank you so much. I'm really excited to have you back in studio. It's been a while since we've had your space represented here, so I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
And this is your host, Tina Mitchell, signing off for the day.
And your co-host, Keelan Harvey.
Make it a great weekend. We'll be here next week, same time, same place, right here at 11:50 a.m. KKNW.